Hello! Today we're going to be kitbashing a Chaos Chariot. Let's jump right into it. So why are we kitbashing a Chaos Chariot? Well, the latest White Dwarf, at least of time of recording, has a cool rule set in it for Wasteland Death Races. These are essentially a streamlined set of rules for racing chariots together in the Age of Sigmar setting. I thought they sounded really fun. I personally prefer the more streamlined and less competitive focused rule sets, and they include lots of customization rules for things like creating your own chariot and customizing your racer. I've managed to rope a couple of mates into customizing some chariots of their own. I'm going to have a go at pitching them together on the racetrack. Of course, I don't actually have any Chaos Chariot models, which might be a problem if I'm wanting to race them. What I do have are this Chaos Warrior, one of the free ones that the Games Workshop stores give out sometimes, a couple of horses, these particular ones are from the Daughters of Khaine, and a sprue from an old Tomb King's chariot set. We'll put these together and have a Chaos Racer in no time. The first step in making our chariot is to remove the riders from the horses. I initially tried using a small saw and a sharp knife for this, but they were quite slow, so we're going to switch to the rotary tool to speed things up. Make sure to wear a mask if you do this though, as it creates a lot of fine plastic particles that are eager to make their new home in your lungs. Although you can try to use the rotary tool to cut through the mini like a knife, this risks melting a lot of the plastic. Instead, it's better to drill a series of holes along where you want to cut. It's then a lot easier to remove the rider in a controlled manner without melting too much of the mini in the process. A hobby knife was then used to do a little cleanup of the edges. Now if you want to, you could properly sculpt the rest of the horse, give it a new saddle and a new connection point for the reins. Personally, I think I'm just going to fill in the holes and put some cloth barding over the top. It should be a lot quicker and hopefully still look just as nice. We're going to start by filling out the bulk of the horses' bodies with milliput. In this case I'm using terracotta milliput, as my normal milliput has expired, but functionally there aren't really any differences to regular milliput. This is just meant to fill out the body of the horse though, not act as the final layer. For that we'll be using Kneadatite epoxy, also known as greenstuff. I'm trying to follow the rough contours of the horse's body, but it doesn't have to be perfect. We'll be adding some barding later, which will be a sneaky way of covering up any mistakes or inaccuracies we make here. Next, we're going to make the mounting point for the yoke. Given the name, you might expect some eggs to be involved here, but alas, it's only plastic. To make the mounting point, we'll cut out some rectangles from a sheet of styrene, using a sharp knife and a steel ruler. The connecting point on the yoke itself is round, so a hollow piece of styrene tubing will provide a good socket for it to fit into. A bit of superglue attaches the piece to the horse nicely. Now, we could sculpt a whole harness for this, which would probably be quite fun now that I think about it, but for the sake of getting our chariot ready in decent time, we're going to take a simpler route. We'll start by cutting a piece of regular tissue paper to size with some scissors, checking how it fits around the shape of the patral and horse's shoulder. I cut a small cross in the tissue paper to allow the styrene tube to poke through. A dab of superglue holds it in place while we mix the PVA. Remember to glue your fingers to it at least twice during the process. To stiffen the tissue paper and make it conform to the shape of the horse better, we'll be using the trusty mix of diluted PVA glue and water. The water soaks through the tissue paper and helps draw the glue into and through it so that it's thoroughly soaked. You can poke the tissue around to encourage cloth-like folds and shapes. Excess water or glue can also be soaked up with a paper towel to reduce the weight on the tissue and stop it from dripping everywhere. While the horses are drying, we can make the chariot. This one is left over from when I was a teenager and tried to get into Warhammer Fantasy battles. There's still some paint on it from that era, but it's not covering any major details, so I'm not going to worry about stripping it. The primer we apply later will cover it properly. Assembling the chariot is straightforward. The instructions went missing years ago, but there's nothing boggling about how it all goes together. The main thing to be careful of is any remaining mould lines, which tend to be more pronounced on older kits, and areas where paint might stop the plastic glue from working. In these cases, a hobby knife can be used to scrape away the excess plastic or paint. There's a fairly visible seam on the front of the chariot. Fortunately, the Chaos Warrior's shield fits nicely on top of the draft pole, and it covers the seam line while making the chariot's allegiance visible. I used the micromot again to grind off the arm originally carrying it. Our horses have dried, so we can cut them off their original bases and glue them to the one we're using for the chariot. I'm using some blue tack to hold them in place temporarily so we can get an idea for positioning. I'm gluing the chariot itself in place first with some plastic cement. The horses are then removed and reattached, this time with glue. The last step is to attach the shield, then it's ready for its rider. The Chaos Warrior has quite a large cloak that looks lovely but needs to be billowing out behind them more, as if caught by the wind. To that end, we're going to detach it with a hobby saw. I also want to disassemble the Mini to make changing its pose easier. The GW store required that it be built there and then, which isn't an issue normally, but does make it harder if you're going to use the model for kit bashes like this. Maybe that's the point. Now our poor warrior has been disarticulated, I can play around with the pieces to get a feel for where I want everything to go, and what sculpting will be needed to do it. We need to make the legs stand closer together if they're going to fit in the chariot. I'm using a sharp hobby knife to carve off excess plastic, followed by a piece of green stuff to initially hold the leg in place. The cloak also needs a little more work to get it to fit into its new place. A combination of cutting with the hobby knife and milling with the micromot help to smooth it into a shape that can be glued to the warrior. Green stuff can then be used to fill in the gaps and repair the fur trimming. I've been sculpting miniatures for about 8 years or so. In that time there are two main lessons I've learned. The first is to keep the tip of your tool relatively damp while you're working. You don't want it soaking wet, you'll get water everywhere, and that won't help you see what you're sculpting. But just damp enough so that the Kneadatite epoxy doesn't stick to the tool while you're trying to sculpt it. You can also use Vaseline for this if you're sculpting the surface details, but you've got to be a bit more careful with that, as the Vaseline will stop more green stuff sticking on top of it, and will stop your paint from adhering to it if you don't clean it off thoroughly. The second big lesson is to know when to stop sculpting and let it cure. So many times, when I was getting into sculpting, there were so many times where I would spend ages, or what felt like ages, doing this perfect little detail, getting it just how I wanted it, only for me to move on to the next bit and to accidentally stick my thumb in it and completely ruin what it was I just sculpted. And following that, there were so many times where I thought, like this is after a couple of years of sculpting, there were so many times where I thought, oh, I'm good enough now. I used to make that mistake while I was new, but I'm more skilled now, I'm more experienced, I know how to hold the miniature so I don't ruin the bit I've just sculpted. And so many times I would still make that same mistake. It is much better, once you've sculpted a bit to the level you're happy with, to just set the model aside, let it cure, and come back to finish the rest of the sculpting later. Now, the observant among you may have noticed that the rider is still missing their left hand, since we removed it for the shield. This isn't a problem though, as we'll be giving them a new one to hold the reins with. I initially tried using a spare hand from the Sequitur Mini, but the glove didn't quite match the rest of the armour. I ended up going to my bits box and picking out a different Stormcast hand, this time from a Liberator, and using that instead. We're getting there with the pose, but I'm not sure about the halberd. Let's see if we can turn it into a whip, something to spur the horses on and lash out at other racers. I've got some spare dorsals of Khaine whips which should do the trick. There we are. We're going to keep the rider and chariot separate while we apply the base coats of paint, just to help make things easier on ourselves. I primed the chariot in grey, but I'm adding a white base coat to some of the panelling. I want to try going for a yellow and silver colour scheme, but most yellows have famously poor coverage, so a white base coat should help compensate for that. I did consider going for yellow and blue instead, like Anakin's Pod Racer and Phantom Menace, but I'm not sure the horses produce enough thrust for that. Maybe the next one though. So it's been about a month and a half since I was last able to work on this. Various things in life have come up, but I'm back at it now. Looking at it with fresh eyes, I'm not quite happy with the coverage of the yellow paint. Even after 3 coats it still hadn't achieved proper opacity, so I've decided to strip the yellow paint back, reprime it, and I'm going to try a different brand of yellow paint. In this case Vallejo. We'll see how it goes. I'm quite happy with that yellow, so we're going to move on to the wood details. We'll use Citadel's Baneblade Brown for these. The bodies of the horses themselves are picked out in a cold dark grey, almost black shade, while the hooves are picked out in a warm grey. Black is used for the barding, manes and tails. The reins and leather details are picked out in a cold brown, specifically dryad bark from Citadel. I used hobgrot hide to paint the teeth, while a yellow bone colour is applied to the horns jutting out of the horse's legs. We'll be painting the eyes to look like they're glowing red, but, similarly to the yellow, this is best achieved by starting with a bright white base coat. Vallejo's oily steel is our metallic of choice for this mini. We'll apply it on the shield, trim and underside of the carriage, wheel rims, metal detailing on the yokes and draft pole, and on the horse's armour and harnesses. Mephiston red is glazed over the eyes, letting it settle in the recesses to give it a slight glowing look. We're also applying a volumetric highlight to the yellow panelling and horses' bodies. The manes are highlighted with a quick dry brush of a warm grey, while wooden details are highlighted by mixing a little white into Baneblade Brown and dry brushing that over the raised surfaces. Now we're going to apply a little mud. Not too much though, as drier ground is typically more suitable for racing. A richer dark brown is applied sparingly on the hooves and lower parts of the chariot to suggest flecks of fresh mud, while a lighter, more desaturated brown shows areas where the mud has dried. Lastly, a little silver is mixed into the oily steel colour and applied on the raised edges of metal components. The rider we're going to keep relatively simple. We'll attach them to a base temporarily so we can hold them more easily with a painting handle, and prime them with a grey spray primer. Cloth sections of their armour will be painted with a dark grey, while the armour itself is painted with the same oily steel we used on the chariot. Large leather surfaces, like the boots and cloak, are done in dryad bark. We're going to use some contrast paints on the furs and smaller leather details though, so I'm base coating them in white. Snakebite leather is then used on the straps and whip, while skeleton hoard is used on the fur. Thundear brown is mixed into the dryad bark to apply as a volumetric highlight on the cloak, leaving the dryad bark in the recesses. An off-white is dry brushed over the furs of the rider's cloak. With the base colours done, I'm applying a quick oil wash over the whole mini. This is mostly black, but with a little brown mixed in. Finally, a light dry brush of dirt around the boots and hem of their cloak finishes off the rider's look for the moment. Now we just need to remove them from their base and glue them to the chariot. I'm quite happy with how this looks so far. I think the base coats have gone on pretty well. We've not applied any oils or weathering yet, we've not done the base of course. Before we do any of that though, we need to make the reins still. These are going to be made using greenstuff. We'll start by mixing the two components of the epoxy together. Mine is getting a little old and lumpy, so I wouldn't use this for any super detailed work, but it's fine for making reins with. Now the two parts are combined, I'm going to roll it out into a long sausage shape, then start to flatten it. I'm just using a straight-sided glass for this, as, with a bit of water, it won't stick to the green stuff like a wooden rolling pin would. Make sure to keep the cutting mat wet while working, or the green stuff will stick to it as well. To give a consistent thickness to the flattened green stuff, I cut out some strips of styrene and used them as guides. Then I left the green stuff to cure for an hour or so. Not so long that it loses all flexibility, but enough that there's some resistance when we cut or stretch it. Then I simply cut some lengths out with a hobby knife. Using some tweezers, I draped the strip across the model, then pressed it into an attachment point at one end. This isn't a super firm hold, but it's enough to keep it in place while we attach the other ends to our rider's fist. Once the main strips are fully cured, we can cut off the excess, then use a little more green stuff to finish shaping it. To paint the reins, we're going to use the same desaturated brown we used to paint the horse's harness and rider's boots. I'm using an all-over oil wash for the shading and weathering, as I like the control you get from the longer drying times. A large brush is used to apply the wash all over the model, and excess is removed with a clean brush. A dry brush without any thinners on it is used to blend and smear the oil wash, while thinners can be used to remove the wash entirely. My goal is to make it look weathered but not uncared for. This warrior lives for the race, and they care for their vehicle accordingly. To base the miniature, we're going to use the leftover basing mix from my Goblin diorama video. I cover the base with a layer of PVA glue, making sure to get it between the horse's hooves and everywhere we want the basing material to stick. Then we use a small sieve to get a layer of dirt all over the base, and scatter a little extra detailing material on top. Quite a bit will get over the chariot, but without any PVA glue or sealant, we can just use a spare brush to brush it all off. I'm using our old friend's isopropyl alcohol and diluted PVA glue to seal the basing materials in place. The IPA goes on first, and essentially breaks any surface tension the PVA tries to form, allowing it to flow down to the plastic base below. The pipette can also be used to suck up any areas where the PVA pulls too heavily. It's not the end of the world if it does pull, as it tends to form a glossy look like puddles of water. But since we don't want our racecourse to look wet, we'll be trying to avoid that. While it's drying, it's important to knock over the model at least once, scattering the basing material and glue all over your cutting mat. For bonus points, you can even forget to film it, so that people watching without sound might still think you know what you're doing. A second coat is applied over the first to make sure it's properly secure, and safe for transport between gaming spaces. Once it's been given plenty of time to dry, we use a file to clean up the edges before painting the rim in your choice of base colour. Personally, I like the traditional black. With that all done, it's on to the glamour shots. I'm actually quite happy with this little piece. It's not the best painting I've ever done, but it's more than good enough for racing around the tabletop. I think it's a really good use of 3 different kits that I otherwise wasn't likely to use anytime soon. It's also just fun getting to kitbash different things together and see how I can make them work. And ultimately that's what this hobby's all about, having fun. I've tried using a different microphone for filming this. It's allowed me to do the in-person sections that you see spliced throughout the video, but it's a little bit more work to set up. So if you've got any thoughts or feedback, do you enjoy the in-person bits? Do you prefer when it's just the voiceover narration? Please let me know. That's it for today though. I've been Mark, and I hope you have a wonderful day.